Webinar is brought to you by the Active Aging and Lifelong Learning Subcommittee. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Jeremy Seah and I am the chairperson for the Active Aging and Lifelong Learning Subcommittee. Today's webinar will be an hour long with 30 minutes for question and answers. You can type up your questions and you can vote questions that are of great interest to you. The next event is on the 15th of September from 4:30 to 6 p.m. The topic is Care for Your Heart, Heart Attack versus Sudden Cardiac Death by Dr. Eric Chong, an interventionalist cardiologist from the Farrer Park Hospital. Let me introduce our speakers for today. She is Dr. Chia Ying Mi. She has a PhD in education from UC Berkeley and has worked for over 40 years as a teacher educator, and consultant in English language and teacher education. 3 years ago, she retired to teach mindfulness full-time. She has done a course in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and has trained with mindful schools in the US to teach mindfulness to youths and children. She maintains a practice through regular retreats, online courses, and interactions with fellow mindfulness colleagues. Without much ado, let me hand over to Dr. Chia. Dr. Chia, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for that kind introduction. And hello, everyone. Good evening. I don't know if there are any friends out there, but if there are, special shout out to you. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm really pleased to be here. Let me share my screen straight away. Right, I trust everybody can hear well. Not an issue, right. So I'm very pleased to be here, and I want to thank you for inviting me to share my understanding about mindfulness and aging with you. Like you, I'm also an aging senior citizen, and a couple of years ago, I retired into the world of teaching mindfulness. Also, I am a cancer survivor, so I don't claim to be an expert in the area of aging or in geriatrics, not at all. But as one who is experiencing some of the challenges of aging, I do have some thoughts and concerns about aging and about growing old. At the same time, I don't want to claim to be an expert in mindfulness either, although I must say I am a practitioner and I try to keep up to date with all of the developments. So today I'm here to share some of my thoughts and understandings about the practices of mindfulness and how they have helped me on my journey of aging. And perhaps some of that might be relevant or helpful to you as well. So before we start, I thought we might just want to take a minute to do a mindful check-in. And so I want to invite you to join me to do that little mindful check-in if you wish to, right? So let us all find a comfortable position and sit up straight with our feet touching the ground. And if you feel comfortable, do let your eyes closed. If not, just gently unfocus your eyes and look at a point on the ground. So let's take a moment to arrive at this place, to welcome ourselves to this place. Just gather your attention in your body. Feel your breath, feel your feet, wiggle your toes, just arriving. Now feel into any sensations, any holdings, any tightness you may feel in your body. And at the same time, feel into your mood, into your emotions. Ask yourself, what's the weather like inside of me? Is it calm, stormy, windy? And just acknowledge whatever is being felt and let it be. Just feeling how we are with awareness and acknowledging whatever there is to be felt. Breathing in and breathing out with awareness. Breathing in and breathing out, moment to moment. And when you're ready, allow your eyes to open. How was that for you? I hope it helps to center you and bring you to this place with me this afternoon. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn to the topics that I will cover today. And here are some of the things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about positive aging and some of the concerns related to aging. And then I want to spend a good deal of time talking about mindfulness and the practices of mindfulness and how mindfulness can help us to age positively. In between, we'll watch a couple of videos and then we'll do a few practices if you want to. If not, you can just sit back and relax. Okay? So at this point, I want to do a quick poll. Jocelyn will help us with that to find out how many of you know anything about mindfulness. So let's do a poll to say, I know something about mindfulness, yes or no. That will give us a quick idea as to whether there's anybody who is completely new to mindfulness or people here are already familiar with mindfulness. Okay, so I will leave that poll and move on while waiting for the results to be collated. Right. Here we are. Wow. Yes, I know something about mindfulness, 73%. No, 27%. Terrific, not to worry. So I'm glad you know something about mindfulness because that will help you to build a bridge to whatever I'm saying, and then it will be much easier for you to understand. And for those of you who don't know anything, not to worry at all, right? This is just mindfulness 101 here. So I want to start off by asking how old you are. Sometimes we don't like to ask that question, but you all know, of course, right? We are as old as we feel sometimes, as they say. So the new literature tells us, of course, that we are only old if we have reached 65 years old. I mean, if you're younger than 65, I'm sorry, you're not old, right? So if you're 65 years old, they are what you call the young old. Hooray. Or if you're more than 74 years old, you are the middle old. And if you're more than 85 years old, then you are the old old. I'm sorry, right? So let's see how many of you are in what category here. And we just had the poll done. Wow, so many of you are young people, younger than 65. They have 62% of you. Wow. And there are 22% who are in the young old category. I must tell you that I'm in the young old category, and 14% in the middle old category, and 3% in the more than 85 years old. Good for you, whoever you are. Terrific. Wonderful. Thank you so much, right? But you know, in many instances, old age is actually not defined by years of old, but actually defined by the loss, by new roles that we have, and sometimes the loss of roles that we used to have, or sometimes by our inability to contribute to society. So it's not always just old, right? But regardless of what kind of old person we are, I think we all want to be able to stretch this third age of our lives and make the most of it before we get to the fourth age where we fall off this steep cliff. Oh my goodness, the way that's described by Paul Higgs and Chris Kellett is really scary. An arena of inactive, unhealthy, and unproductive, and ultimately unsuccessful aging. You know what most people say, right? Old people need to run a fast race, and after that, just drop off and go off. Maybe that's what they mean, yeah. So, but of course, what we all want to do is to age positively. I keep clicking the wrong thing, right? So positive aging is an approach that recognizes how our mindset and our attitude affect our physical and emotional well-being. So here you have the definition of positive aging from the Positive Psychology Institute. And it says there, maintaining a positive attitude, feeling good about yourself, keeping fit and healthy, and engaging fully in life as you age. And if you look at all of those qualities, you realize that some of them refer to your physical self, some to your social self, and some to your cognitive and your mental self, right? And you see this charming senior lady here is my mother-in-law. She looks terrific, doesn't she, at 95. This button is always eluding me. Right. So what's your image of a positive senior? What's positive aging to you? How can one engage fully in life in our old age? Sadly, though, regardless of our age, whether you're young, old, or old, the dominant narrative for us is that old is not gold. It's sad, although we say old is gold, right? We always think of a time that in our old age, it's a time where everything atrophies. Oh. So if you're an old person and you're often forgetting things and a little bit forgetful, you know what they will say, dementia is at the doorstep, or Alzheimer's is at the doorstep, right? But I know many young people who are equally forgetful, never know what, where things are and all that. But we don't condemn them to the same fate. We don't tell them that they're at the doorstep of dementia or dementia is at their doorstep, right? So it's the same behavior, but the narrative is very different, right? So the image of our seniors is often colored by the narratives we hear about aging. In fact, sometimes I get very annoyed, when you look at books and all that, and every time you see a picture of an aging person, they're invariably bent over with a stick. And I always say, why? I mean, haven't you seen an elderly person who walks up straight, right? But there you are, that's the dominant narrative. But of course, we all want to grow old, to be the wise, calm, engaged, healthy senior person. We don't want to be the grumpy, complaining, inactive, entitled, sick old geezer, do we, right? And I'd like to think that as we grow old, we can evolve into these wise men and women. And it's not so much that we want to be able to show the young that we can be that, but it's more to ensure that we are able to live out our lives with dignity and a certain amount of equanimity. And even if we don't end up as wise men and women, we should age with a solid sense of our own intrinsic worth as seniors. Without this, we feel like we are just a burden to society, ready to be moved up anytime. We are not useful anymore, okay? But as we look, of course, even as I say that, the dominant narrative is negative, we know, of course, that older people are actually happy people, right? So a lot of the research, and this is a research from the Center for Healthy Aging, tells us that people who are 65 and above are very happy compared to the other age groups. And this is a 2016 study that older people are happier and satisfied, and they have this positivity bias that comes from them becoming grandparents. So it's called a grandparent syndrome. So woe to us who are not grandparents, right? Because when you are a grandparent, your feelings of compassion and gratitude increase tremendously. And those of you who have been catching up with the papers will know that about 2 weeks ago, there was a survey in Singapore on mental health. And in that survey, seniors actually come out very well. So half of the younger respondents are always worrying, whereas only 38% of the older respondents say they have that concern. Retirees and working adults tend to perceive themselves as more mentally resilient compared to non-working adults and students. And of course, 55% of retirees report that they're able to handle unpleasant emotions such as sadness, fear, and anger. Yeah. So these are all very wonderful and positive news about growing old and about, how growing old, we can still be very strong and resilient at growing old. But despite that, my friends, I'm sure when you look around your own circle, you know of some unhappy seniors. Yeah. So what are the challenges that make us unhappy? So what are the challenges to old age? And of course, there are 3 big challenges to old age, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but let me just go through them all the same. So the first thing, of course, is physical. And you know what it's like when we get together with our friends. Invariably, we talk about our medication, our aches and pains, right? And the checkups we're going to have in the hospital and whatever the case. There is no denying, of course, that our bodies are not what they used to be. Sad to say, right? And that the challenge is actually greater for some than the others. But that's not the be all and the end all of it, right? That is a challenge, but it's something can be done about it. The other big challenge, of course, is mental or cognitive decline. And the other big topic, of course, for all seniors must be dementia or Alzheimer's or some version of that. We're all afraid of losing our marbles. So while cognitive decline is inevitable, it's not a given. I think the research shows that we don't normally lose our memory. We don't experience memory decay as commonly thought, right? So there's some forgetfulness, but it's not that bad. And we all know, of course, about the neuroplasticity of the brain, and that the brain can continue to grow if we work at growing the brain. Right? But sometimes the loss of mental decline or cognitive decline is really due to a loss of purpose and focus in our life rather than actual cognitive decline, I think. I always say that there must be a reason why we get up in the morning. If not, why bother, right? And sometimes, of course, this is very true for those of us who have defined our lives, our identity, through our work. So once the work is taken away from us, who are we? And this is a story I've heard over and over again from many of my senior friends who were very important people at one time. And then when they lost, or when they retired, and then they took on other part-time jobs and all, it was sad to find that, you know, nobody respected them anymore because they were no longer so-and-so. And this is something that we need to get used to, or we need to acknowledge and accept. And not doing that, of course, is very difficult. So in conjunction with that, of course, we do actually have cultivated and nurtured a lot of unhealthy thinking patterns all through our lives, right? And sometimes these unhealthy thinking patterns just cement and become stronger as we grow older. I ask you to think about it. Have you got any unhealthy thinking habits? We should think about what our habitual thinking patterns are like sometimes, right? And finally, of course, the social challenge of being isolated. I think it's really a big challenge too, especially in this era when we have small families and we only have 1 or 2 children, that sort of thing. So losing connections with other people can lead to depression. And we know that depression is the #1, the top contributor to years of life lost in disability. The second, of course, is heart problem, but depression is the #1 thing. So, and sometimes, as I say, this is part of the social challenge, because a lot of the time, depression is caused by a loss of connection, and relationships change as we age and as our roles change as well, right? So again, the question is, can we adjust to these changes? And indeed, how can we find new meanings and new roles for ourselves as seniors? Daniel Levitin, in his book, Successful Aging, it talks about 2 important correlates that predict successful aging. One is conscientiousness. Right? Seems strange to talk about conscientiousness, but conscientiousness, of course, he says, is doing the correct thing that will benefit us. And what are these correct things? Going for your regular medical checkup, brush your teeth often, eat your omega-3, save money, exercise, and all that. And people who do these things conscientiously tend to age better. Now, the opposite of that, of course, is what Kozlowski calls crimes of wisdom. These are things that you do, you know you should not do, but you carry on doing that. So these crimes of wisdom are not good for you. The other factor that he talked about, of course, is openness to experience. And that is a willingness to try new things and to avoid complacency. So if you try new things and you avoid complacency and all that, you'll know that eventually you avoid cognitive decline. And we'll look at this a little bit more when we look at the little video on neuroplasticity. Okay? So to grow old wisely and with our self-worth intact, we need to cultivate the right mindset and attitude, as was pointed out by the Positive Psychology Institute. And the right mindset and attitude begins with a great awareness of who we are and what we are doing. If we don't know who we are and what we are doing, people won't respect you, right? So the right mindset also will prompt you to cultivate the 2 traits that Daniel Levitin talked about, conscientiousness and openness to experience, right? And I believe that mindfulness as a lifelong practice can also contribute to successful aging, because all the things we do in mindfulness relates to the two factors that Daniel Levitin talked about. Okay. So let's move on very quickly and say, what is mindfulness, right? There are many definitions of mindfulness, and I just pulled this out. That, in fact, I use this with my children that I teach. Mindfulness is noticing and paying attention. Notice that noticing and paying attention has an intention component. I mean, that's what you intend to do, right? And what do you pay attention to? To what's happening inside of us and what's happening around us, right? And you don't pay attention and notice these things, but you pay attention and notice them with a certain attitude. And this attitude is kindness and without judgment. So we say in mindfulness, there are two components. One is the intention, and the other one is the attitude. Yes. So what is the opposite then of mindfulness, right? So we say, oh, we are being very mindful. So what's the opposite of being mindful? Truly, the opposite of being mindful is being mindless. Mindless. Mindlessness, of course, is not thinking about what we say and what we do, right? Let me give you some examples. Have you had times when you've got into your car and driven somewhere and then got there and have no recollection or memory as to how you even got there? And sometimes you even ask, why am I here? Or have you ever said something to somebody and then after that immediately regretting it, saying, oops, I shouldn't have said that? That's kind of mindless, isn't it? Or have you eaten food and eaten it very quickly? At the end, you don't actually remember the actual taste of it. I have a friend who says that all kinds of meat she eats taste the same. No awareness anymore. Or are you one of those who get up early in the morning and then as soon as your eyes are open, reach up and grab your phone and immediately look at your WhatsApp, and after that don't even remember what is in the WhatsApp messages, but you do it because it's something that just comes to you? So we can list many examples of things that we do on autopilot. We are operating on autopilot most of the time. So when we are operating on autopilot, we tend to react to things around us instead of responding to them thoughtfully, because we are doing all of these things out of a lifelong habit. One practice, of course, that cultivates or nurtures this autopilot is our tendency to multitask. We do many things at one time and we want to do it well, of course, right? And the research suggests, of course, it's very conclusive that multitasking is actually not good for us, and that it's actually very hard for our brain to multitask because our brain can only focus on one thing at a time. And that if you multitask, do different things, whatever you do, tend to suffer, yeah? And some of us women, of course, think that we can multitask better than men, and actually secretly believe that. But sadly, the research tells us no, women also cannot multitask well. Yeah, the results are quite conclusive there. So when we are young, of course, and when we are working, we are forced to multitask because we have so many roles in our lives that we do. We are working, and then we have families, and we have this and that, right? But now at our old age, do we really need to do several things at one time? Are we still in the habit of doing several things at one time because we used to do that? Because doing so will only lead to some mindlessness, yeah? So the next thing is, if your mind is not mindless, maybe your mind is full. It's mind full. So what is it full of? Most times, of course, it's full of thoughts. Thoughts. Our mind doesn't stop thinking. Just goes on and on and on, right? 12,000 to 60,000 thoughts a day, 80% of which are negative. And 95% of these thoughts are repetitive. It's the same old story. But it keeps going on and on in our mind. And in fact, when you think about it, old people tend to suffer from insomnia. And one of the reasons why we have insomnia is because the mind is too active thinking about things. I know it happens to me. Yeah. So when I asked my friends, I did kind of a little research about my senior friends. So what are the things they talk or worry about, they think about and all that. And many of them talked about things like, oh, they worry about their grown-up children, then they worry about their grandchildren, and then they worry about dying, and then they worry about illness, and then they worry about, having whatever it is. And it goes on and on. And I'm sure you know what some of these worries are. But the research also suggests that 85% of the things that we worry about never really happen. I can tell you this from my own personal experience because I used to be a worrier when I was young. I used to worry about my kid all the time, right? And now in retrospect, when I look back and I kind of regret all the years I've spent in worrying and not sleeping sometimes, yeah? Worrying is actually something that is really unbeneficial and a complete waste of time. And of course, I say 85% of the things that we worry about don't happen. But the 15% of things that do happen, and this includes death, right, will happen. But what the research finds out is that when that happens, when those 15% of things happen, 79% or 80% of us are better able to handle it. So it's not that we are not going to be able to handle the difficult problems that arise. If we are prepared, I think we can handle anything. So it's really how we prepare our mind, isn't it? So, and yes, it doesn't really help that our mind is also a wandering one. 47% of the time, our mind is wandering all over the place, as maybe your mind is, because I've been talking for a while now, right? So we know, of course, that human attention is dwindling. And this is a research from 2015, that now we have an attention span that is shorter than that of a goldfish, right? Of course, this might seem quite sensational. Is it really true, we said? Well, but we all know for a fact that attention is the most valuable commodity in our time now. It is the most valuable commodity. Our children lack attention. I teach kids from kindergarten to primary school. I teach them mindfulness, right? And one of the things we try to do in teaching them mindfulness is to develop attention spans, to develop focus. Right? And it's very, very challenging for some children because if they've had a lifetime, from young of being on screens and watching television and, playing with video games, it's even harder. Adults don't give much attention to children themselves. I see so many children who are starved of attention and affection because adults are so busy with their own world. And of course, they themselves are constantly seduced and distracted by their electronic devices. I see people everywhere. I mean, seniors are complaining about young people walking around looking at their handphone, and that's why there are all these accidents, right? But seniors are equally guilty of doing that, So how many adults have you seen babysitting young people but completely absorbing their devices? Or still using a mobile device to kind of keep a child quiet instead of interacting with the child? Go into any food court and all, it's very common. And again, not just seniors, even young parents do that. So why is that so? Because people just find it hard to give that attention to other people because they're so distracted. Yeah. So some of you, as I said, might be finding it hard to concentrate right now because, you might be doing something simultaneously and listening to the talk because, hey, I can't waste this time, right? But don't feel bad. It's very common. I think most people would do that too. Yeah. So what do we pay attention to when we say pay attention? Yeah. A couple of things we pay attention to. One, of course, is we pay attention to our inner world. The inner world is what we are, what's going on inside us. And this is what my teacher, Vinny Ferraro, calls checking in with yourself. So every now and then we need to check in with ourselves to see what is happening with us, with our thoughts and with our emotions. Are we in touch with what we are feeling and what we are thinking? Our awareness, if we are in touch and we are aware of what's happening inside us, will help regulate our nervous system so that we don't respond in reactive way and we don't wander around in an autopilot manner. Yeah. So a mindfulness practice like body scan, that is quite common, helps us to be aware of what's happening in our bodies. And this is a true story of one of my course mates who was doing the mindfulness course with me. And she told us all that when she was doing the body scan one day, she suddenly felt a little something in her abdomen. Yeah. And she felt so uncomfortable because she kept feeling it as we were, in a body scan, what we do is we ask you to focus on different parts of your body as we go through the narrative or the description. And after feeling that something in her body, she decided to go and have a checkup with the doctor. And true enough, she found something was growing in her body that shouldn't be there. Yeah? So the body scan helps us to be more in touch with our body. Many of you might know that the MBSR, or the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Meditation Program, that was first created by the father of mindfulness, John Kabat-Zinn, in 1979, is a meditation practice that helps patients to manage their chronic pain. So these are patients whom Dr. Kabat-Zinn was dealing with, and they had recurrent chronic pain. And so he developed this program. And instead of telling, and the patients, right, are told, instead of trying to block out their pain and suffering, and you know what it's like, sometimes when we have pain and suffering, we tend to want to block it out or push it away, anything not comfortable, we don't like it, we just pretend it doesn't exist and shove it somewhere and things like that. Well, these patients are told not to do that, not to shove them away and all that, but instead, right, to accept and acknowledge their pain and to investigate it with care and curiosity. So I must tell you that the pain did not reduce, but the patients learn how to better manage their pain, and they can cope better with their condition when they have this practice, and then they don't feel like they are helpless sufferers of pain, right? The other thing we pay attention to, of course, is anything in our outer world experience, or anything that comes through the five senses. And when we teach this to children, we always talk about, using your five senses to experience what's around us. So when we are more aware of what's happening in the outer world, this can actually impact the inner world, our inner world. Of course, as old people, I hope you don't mind me saying old people, I mean, I am an old person myself. It is paramount for us to be aware of our outer world because of safety issues, right? We don't want to fall or break our leg or anything of that sort. But apart from that, you notice, of course, that when you notice the things around us and we pay attention to the things around us, actually can help us to increase our appreciation of life. Now, for instance, do you stop to appreciate a rainbow or a cloud, observe a new bloom? Do you take pleasure in a little breeze when you're walking in the morning? Or are you one of those who don't even notice any of these things and are just kind of like marching to where you're supposed to go and marching back, or the saying that I must finish my exercise, right? So we become in touch with our inner selves and the world around us when we pay attention. And I think that's the fundamental thing in mindfulness. So why mindfulness here, right? So without mindfulness, we have a stimulus. Let's say some young person says something to us that is not very pleasant, or refuses to give up, his seat in the MRT for us, although we are holding a cane, right? So without mindfulness, there is this stimulus, and then there is this immediate reaction. And what could this reaction be? A judgment, a frown, sometimes, something sad, sometimes something unpleasant. And this all comes from a reactivity on our part. With mindfulness, however, there is a stimulus. Yes, this is happening. And then in between, there is a mindfulness. There is this gap that allows you to pause and think about, yeah, this person is not offering me a seat, although he can see that I'm holding a cane. Yeah. Why is that so? And then once you have paused there, you can have space to give a thoughtful response. In other words, what you're doing, what mindfulness is doing, is creating a space in your brain, yeah, and giving you time to think and respond thoughtfully rather than habitually just shooting straight from the hip, so to speak. And I think of this a lot, really, in our everyday communication, because mindful communication is another big area of study in mindfulness, right? A lot of the time when we're talking to people or people are talking to us, we always respond in a habitual way, or we just kind of say this or we say that without actually thinking of the impact of our words on that person. Or we just respond in any old way. If I've learned anything from mindfulness, it is always to kind of pause before quickly rushing into a response, right? And I think that actually reduces a lot of unhappiness in communication. Okay. So here, I want to show you a little video that is about mindfulness, and maybe that will summarize all the things that I have said. And this video is actually narrated by Dan Harris, who is famous, of course, because he is, I think, the founder of 10% Happiness, and he was a news broadcaster on TV in the US, who in one of his broadcasting moments suddenly had a panic attack. And that, of course, brought him to mindfulness. So let's have a quick look at this.
To you, rather than just reacting blindly. You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. So I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribed for you. Let me just close by saying, Mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
I do apologize for the lack of sound in the first part of the video. Forgot to put on the sound. Oh well. Dan Harris, of course, made a few very good points. And like in the old days, people think when you go running, you must be crazy, right? But now it is a part of our life. So down, meditation is something new, but eventually it could be a part of our lives. It's a very common part of lives. And I'm glad you mentioned the word meditation, because meditation is a formal practice of mindfulness. And of course, the opposite of that, of course, the other part of it are the informal practices. And I want to talk a little bit about this now. Most of the time when you hear the word meditation or mindfulness, you kind of imagine a person sitting cross-legged on a cushion and then the fingers in a chin mudra position, and maybe, I don't know, on the sunset and things like that. I think there's some truth in that, that I do sit cross-legged and all that. But the truth is, I do think it also gives a wrong idea of what mindfulness is about. This kind of formal study of formal practice, of course, is extremely valuable in your own contemplation, in your own self-growth, right? And it's highly encouraged that you should sit and check in with yourself every day for a certain amount of time. But the reason why we do that, of course, why we sit in meditation, is because we want to cultivate that space that allows us to act wisely when we are in the hurly-burly of everyday life, right? So apart from the formal practice of sitting and meditation, there are many informal practices that we can actually use to help us develop mindfulness as well. Some of these include practices like yoga, Qigong and Tai Chi. And these are excellent activities because they actually make a mind-body connection for you. Yeah. So when we talk about, the physical aspects of aging, anybody who's done any of these activities or these exercises consistently over a period of time would have noticed that it actually contributes to their physical well-being. I have an auntie who's 95 years old also, not my mother-in-law, another auntie, who actually does Tai Chi, and she has fallen and had strokes and all kinds of things, but she's still perfectly okay because the mindfulness, because the Tai Chi has given her some kind of physical health, right? Or physical strength that she was looking for, that she needed. So apart from that, the Tai Chi and the Qigong and all that, everything else that we do in life can have a mindful component. So any of our daily chores, right? So for instance, we can always move mindfully through a process of mindful walking. I'm sure you know that mindful walking is done very often. In fact, I used to lead a mindful walking group in the Botanic Gardens, and people learn to be aware of their bodies as they move, right? A lot of the time, my friend actually, Marion, describes seniors as being led by their brains rather than by their bodies, right? How many times have we tripped or fallen? Because we assume that the path before us is like what it used to be. And then we miss that little step or that little thing and all that. And we miss that. Why? Because we are operating on autopilot, on a routine, and we are deceived. So mindful walking or any kind of mindful practice helps us to pay attention to our bodies and to what is around us as we move through the path. Mindful eating is another pleasurable activity. As seniors, one of our great joys is makan time, right? We meet all the time to makan here and makan there. But of course, too much makaning or too much eating may not be good for us seniors. It's again one of those crimes against wisdom, right? So eating mindfully actually helps us to not overeat, but also increases our enjoyment of the little food that we eat. What other things can be done mindfully? Almost everything. Washing dishes, when done mindfully, is not a chore. Brushing teeth, gardening, driving. Every time I get into my car, I said, I'm going to drive and I will focus on driving only. So that you're not distracted thinking about this and about that and thinking of what you're going to do when you get there, right? Focus on one thing at a time. And then there'll be fewer accidents, right? And then, of course, there is, as I say, mindful communication with others, being very aware of what you're saying, how you're responding to people. And this is especially so in our interaction with the people closest to us, because we tend to be most neglectful of them, don't we? Yeah, we take them for granted most of the time. So maybe you want to go back and practice a little mindful walking or mindful eating or mindful brushing your teeth, right? And you can see what simply paying a little deliberate attention to what you're doing routinely can actually change that activity for you, right? So as I said, it's very easy to get into a quiet room, sit in a cushion and meditate. But it's very, very challenging when you get out into the big world and there are people there who are constantly triggering you with one thing or the other, right? How do you react then? That is the most important challenge. Okay. So at this point, I want to invite you to do a practice, because most people always tell me that meditation, they can't meditate because they cannot empty their minds. Their minds are full of things. And I said to them, there is no way you can empty your mind, because once your mind is empty, you are dead. Yeah, our mind is constantly full of thoughts. And what we need to do, of course, is to be aware of our thoughts and to kind of explore them with a kind curiosity, right? So this little practice, I'd like to invite you to sit with me for a minute or so. You're welcome to join in or sit back and observe, yeah? So I invite you to sit in an upright position, as always, with your feet touching the ground. And if you're comfortable, allow your eyes to gently close. If not, just unfocus your eyes and look at a spot in front of you. As you sit, focus on your breathing. Feel your breath flowing in and out of your nostrils. You don't have to breathe in any special way. Just notice the air flowing in and out of your nostrils. Notice the cool air as it enters your nose and the warm air as it exits your nose. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out. Take a few slow breaths on your own, just paying attention to the in and the out of your breath. Now try and see if you can be aware of any thoughts that's interrupting your focus. Are there thoughts in your head? Every time a thought pops into your mind, see if you can let the thought go and bring your focus back to your breath. Let the thought go and come back to your breath. So did anyone have thoughts creeping into their head? Did anyone feel inadequate, chided themselves for not being able to focus? Did anyone feel bored or sleepy doing that? Everyone will experience this differently, so there's no right answer to that, right? And there are no wrong answers either. So I'm sure now you're aware that it's very natural to have thoughts coming into our head. And if you're aware of the thought coming into your head, that's already the first step to mindfulness. The problem is when we are not aware of those thoughts, right? And then we allow ourselves to drift away into some line of thoughts without awareness. So the first step is always to be aware of your thoughts. Once you're aware, you can always start again. And instead of chiding yourself and saying, oh, I'm feeling sleepy, I'm not so focused, and all that, maybe ask yourself why, gently, with a curious mind, investigate that. rather than beating yourself up over it. There is no need to be unkind to ourselves or judge ourselves harshly. Mindfulness helps us to cultivate a compassionate attitude towards ourselves and our shortcomings so that we can forgive ourselves for everything that we've done. One way we learn to pay attention, of course, is to find a focus. And in many forms of meditation, the focus could be a mantra, beads, flame, flower, counting even. In mindfulness, we use the body and the breath as an anchor. And that was what we were practicing just now, just focusing on the breath, right? So breathing is something we do all of the time, but we don't necessarily pay attention to the breathing, do we? Yeah? So how do we pay attention to our breath? We pay attention to it by noticing how it feels in our body, the way it goes up in and out of our nostrils, the way our belly rises and falls, our chest expands and contracts, right? And we focus on the breath there, okay? So why do we do that? What are the benefits of breathing? And basically, there are two benefits. Physiologically, we know that when you breathe mindfully, your breath tend to be slow and deep. So slow, deep breaths stimulate the vagus nerve. And this in turn activates the parasympathetic system. And your parasympathetic nervous system, of course, helps to calm you down, reduces your heart rate and reduces stress, right? So let's try this very quickly. To achieve calmness always, your exhalation must always be twice as long as your inhalation. Okay, so we will breathe into the count of 4 and breathe out to the count of 8. And let's just do this twice only. Ready? So we will breathe in, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And in, 2, 3, 4, and out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. If you do this a few times over, you will feel a lot calmer. And sometimes we try to breathe out. We can also breathe out through our mouth. Or we can breathe it out as a sigh. But in any case, you must always make sure that your exhalation is longer than your inhalation. Psychologically, of course, when you're paying attention to your breath, you are fully in the present for the duration of the breath. You can't be thinking of the past, which often brings about regrets, or thinking about the future, which often makes you worry. So for that short time when you're focusing on your breath, you're free from the burden of carrying the past and the future, and your mind and the body gets a little moment of relief. Yeah? This is a quotation from Shakespeare about there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. We think a lot, don't we, all of the time? And we already said how much we think, and we use our brains a lot for thinking in our work lives, right? But the neuroscience tells us that our brain has a negativity bias. And Rick Hansen, of course, describes this as our brain is Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. And what does this mean? It simply means that our brain loves to remember all the bad things that happen to us. And this negativity bias, of course, I think you recognize it yourself. Let's say you go out with your friends and you had a great time, makan and shopping and all that. And then on your way back, your Grab driver, was really nasty to you. And when you get home, what's the first thing you will talk about or remember? Not a wonderful time with your friends, really. The Grab driver is the person that you will start talking to your family about, right? So our brain has evolved over the years, right? And although we don't have the same kind of stress or threats that our caveman ancestors used to have, the limbic brain is still on the lookout for any kind of dangers that will threaten us. But of course, in these modern days, our dangers are no longer woolly mammoths and dinosaurs and velociraptors and things like that. It is actually stuff like the annoying Grab driver, or the inconsiderate and callous PMD scooters, inconsiderate family members, and anyone and anybody who kind of irritates or stresses out. But unfortunately, the old caveman, when a dinosaur is there, he can run very fast. And the very physical act of running actually helps him to get rid of the stress. But in these days, of course, we don't run, right? We stay home. And so what happens really is the body generates high levels of the stress hormone cortisol. And this actually exacerbates our anxiety. So if we are constantly worried and we're constantly in some kind of low-grade stress, worrying about this, worrying about that, it has effects on our nervous system. So our amygdala, which is the little thing in the limbic brain, as you can see in the picture there, the fight, flight, or freeze center, tends to become overworked and in fact gets actually bigger. And then we are constantly, in danger of what is called an amygdala hijack. That means the smallest thing triggers us and then we just flip our lid, literally flip our lid. And our prefrontal cortex cannot actually help us to make a rational decision or judgment, right? So you think about us when we are getting old and in our old age, we often have a lot of uncontrollable streams of thoughts and things like that. And this is a process that is called rumination. We ruminate over the old days and, and I mean, I have a lot of old friends that I am in touch with and I work with. And sometimes it's really amazing how, certain old stories will come back from somewhere, and then they start getting very upset and all that. Whereas, so much water has passed under the bridge since then, yeah. So rumination and all of these thoughts have got a tremendous effect on our mental and social life. Because the research says that for every one negative event, we need 3 positive events to counteract it. So if you're constantly focusing on a huge negative event, can you imagine how hard it is to find 3 huge positive events to counteract that? And if you're talking about relationships, which is of course centered to all of our lives, right? With your spouse, with your children, the ratio is actually 1 to 5. So for one negative thing that you do in a relationship, you need 5 positive events to counteract that. That's a lot, isn't it? Yeah. So if you understand that our brain has this negativity bias, we can do a lot more to actually counteract the effect of it. And we can actually make a conscious decision not to be affected and ask ourselves, is this our negativity bias working, or is it really that painful to us, right? And so, it leads me to this part where this is a quotation, say your mind takes the shape of what it rests on, right? So if you're constantly resting your mind on things that are irritating, stressful, unkind, mean, right, then you become that, unfortunately, right? So ask yourself always, what do you rest your mind on? Again, right, a good contemplative question to think about, yeah? So now I want to show you a quick video, and now let me look if I get the sound. Yes, and this is on neuroplasticity.
For many years, scientists have thought the brain was fixed and hardwired and couldn't change after childhood. But recent research shows this is simply not the case at all, and we know that people's brains can change well into old age. In fact, our brains change every day. Our brains are considered to be plastic or pliable, and this has helped neuroscientists coin the term neuroplasticity. So how does neuroplasticity work? Well, think of your brain as a huge city with thousands of roads and lots of traffic. Some of these roads are faster than others, with lots of traffic moving quickly and easily. These roads with all their traffic represent our established ways of thinking, feeling and doing. Every time we think, feel or do something in the same way, we strengthen this road, making it faster, and it becomes quicker and easier for our brains to travel this pathway. But by contrast, if a road wasn't built well in the first place, or becomes blocked, or we think, feel or do something differently, we start to use a different pathway. If we keep using that new road, our brains begin to use this pathway more and more, and this new way of thinking, feeling or doing becomes automatic. In the meantime, the old pathway gets less and less use and weakens. In other cases, it may be possible to repair or rebuild a blocked pathway. This process of rewiring your brain by strengthening existing pathways, making new ones, weakening old ones, and repairing broken ones is neuroplasticity in action. It is important to understand that neuroplasticity is not good or bad. It is just what the brain does. Neuroplasticity can result in helpful changes, like when a child learns how to cross a road safely, or when an adult learns a new set of work skills. On the other hand, it can result in unhelpful changes in the brain, like when someone develops a bad habit or an unhealthy way of thinking. The exciting thing is that scientists are getting better and better at directing neuroplasticity in the brain and developing treatments for conditions that were considered to be previously incurable or at least difficult to fix. Things like ADHD and learning disorders, anxiety, depression, chronic pain and migraines, for example. At the Perth Brain Centre, we've helped thousands of people over the last 10 years. We have a team of...
I'm just skipping.
For many years, scientists have thought the brain was fixed and hardwired.
I'm just skipping that part about the Perth Brain Center. It's a little bit of one. I think the one thing he said that is really valuable, of course, is that you should always use your brain, isn't it? The brain doesn't stop growing at all. And that is something that sometimes we often have to fight against, especially those of us who are retired. And we're constantly urged to, hey, take it easy lah. Why are you still working? Relax, relax. All already lah. No need to learn so much lah. Things like that, right? But of course, you know that the harder you work your brain, the better it is for you, isn't it? It promotes, it reduces cognitive decline. And social interactions, of course, are great ways to foster learning, right? And so that simply means as seniors, we need to actually get out and interact and connect with other people. As a senior, of course, you realize that your moods and emotions affect those around you. And this is because of the concept of mirror neurons in our brain. It allows us to actually understand other people, what is happening with other people through imitation. And then there's a process of social contagion where the behavior of one person or the person in your group can influence the behavior of another person. Now, what does that mean? That simply means, you know, and I ask you this question, have you ever thought about the impact of your mood on other people around you? Right? So, you know, sometimes we're in a bad mood or we are grouchy and we go around grouching and all that. And this makes everybody around you, the social contagion, it is contagious. Everybody around you become negative and grumpy as well. And I think when we live in a family or we live with our younger people, we need to be constantly aware of how our moods are affecting them. And of course, as what his name was saying, Dan Harris was saying, this doesn't mean you cannot be angry, right? Of course you can be angry. But the question always is it a conscious choice? Is your mood a conscious choice? Or is it just a reactive autopilot habit? And ask yourself, are you spreading good cheer or are you just grumpy? I think those things are very important. I see it's 5:05, and I'm going to just whiz through very quickly the other two components of mindfulness, which is compassion and self-compassion, which is a kind of self-love, isn't it? I love the Rolling Stones, really, and Mick Jagger sings in the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want, and that you can get no satisfaction. Yeah, I think understanding and accepting that plays such a great role in developing self-compassion for ourselves. Right? Self-compassion is a big area of research right now. And here you see a chart that is by Kristen Neff, one of the gurus of self-compassion. And self-compassion has several components. Self-kindness is being kind to ourselves. And when you're kind to yourself and when you are suffering, you recognize that your suffering is part of the common humanity. You are not alone in your suffering. There is a shared human experience, right? And when you apply mindfulness to it, that means you are open to the reality of the present moment and you acknowledge your suffering and you deal with it the best way you can. Then you can learn to become more compassionate to yourself. Right? And I think, you know, we are high flyers. We all used to have very important jobs. We are perfectionists. We want to do everything well. And a lot of the time, I think we are not very self-loving. We are not very forgiving of ourselves, right? And I think that's something that maybe should change. The last component is gratitude. And gratitude is so important. What is gratitude? It's a feeling of appreciation, wonder, or reverence for what is given. What is given to us, noticing the things in our life that are positive, no matter our situation. So there's a lot of research on gratitude. I was going to show you the book in a while. When you practice gratitude, let's say once a week, just once a week, and this research by Emmons in 2008 says that you have so much better satisfaction, health, cardiovascular profile, better grades in school, more satisfying romantic relationships. And I will testify to that. Definitely gratitude promotes a lot more romantic relationships. Yeah? So, and then next activity, I want to ask you very quickly to think back over your past week or day. Can you name 5 things in your life that you're grateful or thankful for? 5 things. Yeah. Maybe you can jot it down or say it to yourself. What are 5 things I'm grateful for? And I won't ask you for that response. I will just move on. So mindfulness strives to create an emotionally balance. I think that's really important because when we are old, our moods tend to fluctuate a lot, and partly because our hormones are going crazy anyway, right? So we want to maintain that equanimity in our lives, right? And a meaningful life that is nurtured by a spirit of compassion and caring. Kobe Kozlowski again talks about the highest form of spiritual practice is self-observation with self-compassion. I think mindfulness adds a spiritual aspect to our aging lives, right? I think we are all spiritual beings without being necessarily religious in any way. Mindfulness is a contemplative practice. And at this age, we are all seeking to understand ourselves better, our lives better, maybe the world better, maybe the people we are with better. And even now, there is an opportunity for us to start all over again, to be a better human, to be true to ourselves, and to seek the ultimate goal of self-awareness and self-understanding. And I think practicing mindfulness actually can lead us there. And with that, I'm going to finish off by, usually with my students, I always finish off with this mantra with them. Breathing in, we've done our best. Breathing out, we let go of the rest. Right? May you have peace of mind. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Chia. It's indeed a very eye-opening sessions. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences with us. For participants, we are now open for questions. If you have any questions you want to ask, please type in your questions or vote questions that are of relevance to you. We have one question that just came in.
Sure.
The question is mindfulness almost akin to maturity of the mind and heart?
I would like to think so. It is certainly a kind of maturity of the mind and the heart, but it is not something that comes naturally, I feel, because mindfulness requires, you know of many seniors who are supposedly mature, right? But they don't behave in those ways. I think mindfulness is something you need to cultivate through self-contemplation to developing self-awareness. And when you develop that, of course, it leads to a true maturity of the mind and the heart. Yes.
Okay. Another question that just came in. How do I get rid of automatic triggers of anger?
I think, I think it's hard to get rid of anything. And maybe I suggest don't try to get rid, but try to understand why are these things triggering me? Yeah. And sometimes I think, when we say something is triggering us and making us angry, sometimes it's not always something is making us angry. It's something inside of us, isn't it? So in mindful communication, we talk about our needs. That a lot of frustration in life, a lot of anger, a lot of disappointment arises because our needs are not met. And often we are not very literate about what our needs are, right? So we need to understand that if you're triggered by somebody makes you angry, you need to step back and ask yourself, and this is where the attitudinal aspects of curiosity and kindness. Wow, I notice I'm getting angry. Why am I getting angry? What is it, something that he or she did that is triggering me? And think about that. And then reflect on what is the need that you have that wasn't fulfilled that led to this anger. Because if all our needs are fulfilled, we will not be angry or upset or anything. This is a very short answer, I realize, right? It needs a long inquiry, I'm afraid, but the short answer is that. Yes. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Dr. Chia. Any more questions from participants? If you do have it, please type in. As we wait for the questions to roll in, one of the points that you made, Dr. Chia, was that what we call when you do things simultaneously, multitasking. Multitasking is not good, to put it mildly. But in this modern world, this digital age, everyone is told to multitask. How do we try to balance between multitasking and mindfulness, doing tasks, focus on the task on hand, and try to balance the both world?
That's a really good question, Jeremy. And I don't disagree with you that we are all forced to multitask a lot of the time, especially young parents these days, right? I think for me, the secret always is in the pause, you know? So when you're doing all these different things, I think it's always very good to always kind of stop to take a deep breath and to kind of reflect on where you're doing. What we're advocating, or what mindfulness advocates, is not to do things out of a habit, and not to rush from one thing to the other and all that, and just do things without thinking. I'll give you an example of myself. I am a type A plus personality, talk fast, work fast, and things like that. And for a long time, what I used to do is I actually transitioned from one activity to the next without stopping. So I've gone out for a walk or a run and gone to the gym. I'll come back. The next thing I think about is, let me water the plants first. And I water the plants. And after that, okay, let me do this without a pause at all. And after a while, things become quite mindless, right? I might as well be a robot doing all of those things rather than taking any pleasure in watering the plants or actually reflecting on the pleasures of taking a walk out in the morning. So all of those tasks become rather meaningless. We do them, but they don't have any real meaning anymore. And we don't get any satisfaction out of doing it, right? It's just like fulfilling the task. So, it is a way to live, but it's not a very meaningful way, isn't it? Yeah. So always kind of like take a pause. Now what I do is I always stop for a while, and then force myself to stop for a while, take a pause, look around, make note of what is around you, and then think about, okay, what's the next thing I'm going to do? And then do that. And when you do that one thing, focus on that one thing, There is no such thing as doing 5 things because you only have 2 hands, so just one thing. Yeah.
Okay. So the key point is to pause between tasks.
Yes, okay. To take a pause.
Thank you very much. We have a question that just came in. Let me see. We have always been told that our brain cells are dying as we get older. Now, you say that our brain continues to grow. Could you please explain?
Oh, I think there is some truth in both, but I think the research now really shows that your brain will continue to grow if you work your brain. As Phua Chu Kang says, use your brain, right? So if we don't use our brain, right, then the cells will just die, and then there is nothing to replace it. Yeah, you don't, what they talk about. I'm not very good at the scientific part of it, but of course, when you use your brain, the neurons fire, isn't it, and create new synapses and that sort of thing. So if you don't use your brain, obviously, then there is no activity. Then your brain then just atrophies, right? So the secret really is not age. I think the secret is how much you're using your brain, how much challenge you're giving your brain. Learning new things, And everyone tells you for old people, it's good to learn music, it's good to dance because it forces your brain to do the left and right coordination, things like that. Yeah. learn to balance and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. Another question we have here is, can you give us your view on meditation, on the words from the book, from the holy book, like the Bible or Quran? How would how would this help compare to the meditation that you talk about?
Mm. Good question. Let me tell you a story first, and then I will answer the question. I have a friend who actually during the COVID period called me up and told me that she's like highly distracted. She said she can't focus at all. She's a Muslim friend of mine, and she told me that when I'm praying and I'm chanting, halfway through the chanting, I actually lose track of where I am. I don't know which verse I'm on, and whether I have chanted that or not, things like that. And she says she just cannot focus, right? And this question, of course, I think has something to do with the secularity of mindfulness. Lots of people ask if mindfulness is a religious thing, right? Well, of course, it did come from Buddhism. And in every religion in the world, there is, I think, a tradition of meditation, not just Buddhism, I think in every religion. So I often say really that mindfulness is really mental practice. It's mental practice. It's got nothing to do with religion. Yeah. But in the mental practice that we do, what we are training our brain to do is to pay attention and not be distracted. So if you are in any kind of religion and you're praying and you're reciting your verses, but you are constantly distracted, that whatever prayers you're saying become just an automatic thing that you just reel out, sort of thing, instead of actually meaningfully saying those words, then I would say that your prayer is not very effective. But if you apply some mindful principles, and bring mindfulness to your prayer, I think it can bring you closer to your God. Does that help answer the question?
Thank you, Dr. Chia. If there are any more questions that you have for Dr. Chia, please type in your questions. So as we wait for more questions to come in, is there anything else you'd like to add, Dr. Chia?
I would like to share some books about mindfulness that people might be interested in.
Thank you.
This is John Kabat-Zinn's classic Full Catastrophe Living, that he talks about mindfulness. And sometimes this might be hard for people to digest. So often I suggest his abbreviated version, Mindfulness for Beginners by John Kabat-Zinn. It's a very readable book, right, if you want to explore mindfulness. This is also another classic on mindfulness-based MBSR, stress reduction. Mark Williams and Danny Penman, and a lot of people, as he says, a practical guide to finding peace, and it comes with a CD, and so you can actually listen to the guided meditation at the back too. Yeah. Then Tan Chad Ming, of course, a Singaporean, has got Search Inside Yourself, which is the Google version of mindfulness, right? Chad Ming's book is very readable. I've read it several times, and Chad Ming also comes to Singapore quite a bit and talks about mindfulness itself. So he has this book, and he has Joy on Demand, new book, which is also very, very readable. If you're interested in mindful communication, my teacher, Oren J. Sofer, has this book called Say What You Mean, which I think is an excellent, excellent book. I read this a few times. And it says, how to find your voice, speak your truth, and listen deeply. I definitely believe that, mindful communication is really central to our health and happiness. The way we talk to people, the way we talk to our loved ones, especially. And I have actually taken 2 online courses, 24 sessions with Oren just on mindful communication itself. Rick Hanson, as I mentioned before, is an excellent writer who actually makes things very simple. This book, Resilient, of course, is good for seniors because it suggests different ways to, as he says, grow an unshakable core of calm, strength, and happiness. And Rick also has a beautiful podcast, actually, that you can listen to on Spotify. And I actually wanted to also share, what do you call that? Let me just, some apps for mindfulness. So a lot of people use technology now, and you can actually go to your app store and download some of these apps if you are a tech person. I myself use Insight Timer a lot, and Calm. 10% Happier, of course, also is the Dan Harris app, right? And mindfulness app. So these are apps which can start you off on mindfulness and meditation if you need some help. So those are also quite useful. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Chia, for sharing.
Most welcome.
Really, we have a lot of things that we can research on. There's a question that came in.
Yes.
And we talk about, you touched about mindfulness that from the young as well as to the old, or the old. This is just a question. At what age would you recommend for us to begin practicing mindfulness?
I would say from a young age. I really do. I actually taught mindfulness to kindergarten children, K1 and K2, for a whole year last year. And I believe that they can actually start even younger than K1 and K2. And when we teach mindfulness in K1 and K2, we don't actually make them, sit and meditate for a long time, that kind of thing. We don't. But what we teach them to do, of course, is to develop awareness of themselves and of the five senses. We teach them how to focus, by listening to the bell. And of course, we teach them all these notions of self-compassion, love, and gratitude and kindness. Yeah, which I think are really important. I remember there was a little kid in my class. He was, always very rambunctious and running around. And one day he broke his arm, and just so happened that we were doing a lesson on mindful bodies, being aware of your body. And so at the end of the term, and I asked him, so what did we learn today? And he said, I learned to be mindful of my body, he said, which was, I thought, wow, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, yes.
Okay, that's great. A question that came in, is neuroplasticity affected by diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's?
I am not a specialist in those areas to be able to say a definite yes or no, but I think there is a connection, definitely, right? Because what happens in Alzheimer's is perhaps something is not sparking, something is not working up there that leads to that cognitive decline. But I'm afraid I can't give you a real answer to that. It's out of my league, honestly, Parkinson's and all of that. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Dr. Chia. Are there any more questions? If there's none, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Chia for an engaging afternoon. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your skill sets and your thoughts with us. And I'd like to thank all participants, for tuning in. The video will be uploaded and the links will be emailed to our broadcast to all of you. So not to worry, you can follow it, or if you have missed it, certain parts of it, you can go back and follow it. Without much ado, I want to say thank you very much to all of you and have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Thank you, Jeremy.